Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to this, our final From the Archives event, in which we feature Agnes Scott alumna and writer Memye Curtis Tucker's 1993 Writers' Festival appearance. My name is Nicole Stammet, and I am Associate Professor and Chair of English at Agnes Scott College. It has been a true pleasure to share with you some of the gems of the Writers' Festival over the years as we commemorate the 50th anniversary of the festival. To conclude our week-long celebration, we are thrilled to have been able to share with you a reading and a question and answer session from poets Rita Dove and playwright Jacqueline Goldfinger. Later this afternoon at 5, we will hear from Agnes Scott alum Jacqueline Goldfinger, who will be reading from her new work, Devil's Waltz. Upcoming Writers' Festival events can all be accessed via calendar.agnescott.edu. The link is in the chat. Please take a look as well at Karis Books' virtual book booth, which has information about how to purchase some of the works featured this week. We are also thrilled to be offering access to the streaming production of Goldfinger's marvelous play, The Arsonists. It will be available to stream on Showtix4U beginning at midnight tonight and throughout the weekend until Sunday at midnight. And now for our event. Dr. Memye Curtis Tucker is a 9-time Distinguished Writers' Festival guest and gave this 1993 reading at Agnes Scott College Writers' Festival as its first Distinguished Alumna Writer. For 10 years, she also moderated its panel for contest entrants. Former senior editor of Atlanta Review, she has taught courses in poetry writing at Agnes Scott and leads workshops for accomplished poets at Atlanta's Callenwald Fine Arts Center. She was also honored as the 1995 Distinguished Agnes Scott Alumna for service to the college and 1990 Georgia Poet for the Georgia Poetry Circuit. Memye holds a BA in English from Agnes Scott, where she won first prize in acting and poetry, an MA in English and Comparative Literature from Columbia University, and a PhD in English from Emory University, where she was the third woman and the first married woman or mother to receive that award. Her 5 collections of poetry include The Watchers, chosen by Lewis Simpson for Ohio University Press's Hollis Summers Prize, and by the Georgia Center for the Book in 2010 as a book all Georgians should read. In 2019, Main Street Rag brought out her chapbook, A Net to Hold the Wind. Memye's poems have appeared in Poetry Daily, Southern Review, Georgia Review, Prairie Schooner, Oxford American, Colorado Review, numerous anthologies, and abroad in translation. And they have been set as art songs and an artist book. Among her awards are multiple fellowships from MacDowell, VCCA, Hambridge, and the Georgia Council for the Arts, and Georgia Writers Association's Lifetime Achievement Award. It is truly an honor to share this extraordinary writer and teacher with you today. I hope you find her as much of an inspiration as I do.
In the annual Agnes Scott College Writers Festival. Her appearance this year has particular significance, for she's the first distinguished alumna to be invited to read her work in what we hope will be a long and cherished tradition at Agnes Scott College. Memye Curtis Tucker honors us, of course, by coming this afternoon to share her work with us. But it is difficult to imagine anyone else who could more appropriately inaugurate this new event. She is extraordinarily qualified both as an when, as a student, Aurora sponsored a poetry contest. The judge was Randall Jarrell. After college, Memye went to Columbia University, where she took a master's degree in English literature, and then returned to Atlanta to work on her PhD in English literature at Emory. Her dissertation was an astonishing journey into the unknown, as she was the first person to write a dissertation on the work of Northrop Frye, one of the most brilliant and influential literary critics of the 20th century, and even today, the most cited critic in literary studies. Northrop Frye transformed literary criticism, but at the time Memye devoted herself to his work, he had only just really begun to be recognized. Memye became a close friend, of course, of Northrop Frye. She refers to him as Tori. And because of that, one winter's night in 1965, I received an urgent telephone call from Eleanor Hutchins, another alumna to whom this Writers' Festival owes a great debt, who said, "Get in your car and come and get me. Memye Curtis Tucker has Northrop Frye in tow, and they're walking around the campus." I, of course, did just as she had commanded, for I would not have missed the opportunity for anything. And that is my first memory of Memye. That evening was unforgettable as we walked through this very building, just recently completed, and proudly showed the brand new Dana Fine Arts building to Northrop Frye. It was a heady time. As an alumna, she has served the college as president of the National Alumni Association, as a trustee, and as a teacher on the faculty, another first. She has taught the senior seminar in literary criticism, and just last summer, she participated in the first course taught in the Master of Arts in Teaching English program when she presented a 2-day workshop on teaching poetry writing to students in my course on teaching poetry to secondary school students, for which I owe her a particular debt of gratitude. Memye has also presented numerous workshops, both at Callaway and Kennesaw State College. Memye published a chapbook, Holding Patterns, in 1988, and since 1984, her poems have appeared in such magazines as Southern Poetry Review, Southern Review, Cumberland Poetry Review, and Anthology of Magazine Verse and Yearbook of American Poetry. She has won 2 arts grants for poetry from the Georgia Council for the Arts, the Chattahoochee Review Prize for Poetry in 1983, the Armitage Award in 1988, the Cobb Arts Council's Lillian Bennett Sullivan Award, also in 1988, the Reese International Award in 1990, and in 1990 was named the Georgia Poet on Tour of the Georgia Poetry Circuit. This past year, Memye went to Toronto to attend a conference on the legacy of Northrop Frye, and while there, read her poetry at the invitation of the Department of English at the University of Toronto. Last summer, she was invited to spend a month at Ham Beach Center, an artist colony, funded by the National Endowment for the Arts and the Georgia Council for the Arts. And I learned just yesterday that Memye has won a fellowship from the Virginia Center for Creative Arts and spent another month at Ham Beach Center, which she will do in May. Although Memye is torn between her commitment to the work of Northrop Frye and her poetry, it is to her poetry that she now devotes all of her energies. And we are grateful for that and anxiously await for her reading this afternoon. It's a singular pleasure for me to welcome an old friend to this inaugural distinguished alumna reading, Memye Curtis Tucker.
The excitement is being introduced like that, isn't it? How nice to hear your life told by someone who sees only the good parts of it. I'm honored by this occasion, by this invitation, and by your wonderful introduction, Professor Nelson. Agnes Scott College was my mother's alma mater, as well as mine, and it feels like home. It's a wonderful family to be a part of. The Agnes Scott Writers' Festival itself, in a relatively short time, has established itself as a distinctive literary event. I appreciate appreciate all of you who braved the storm to get here. We'll forget what rages outside. Before I begin, I must thank briefly the Georgia Council for the Arts for, as Professor Nelson said, its individual artist grant to me this year, which helped me in the writing of most of these poems. And I must say, because it's in my contract to say, that they are funded by appropriations from the Georgia General Assembly and by funds from the National Endowment for the Arts. I'll read some very new poems and then make a sort of sandwich of some of the older poems from my chapbook and then some new poems again. And I'm going to do something that I swore I would never do, but always seem to do, which is to start with one I just wrote like yesterday. You know, you always think that one's wonderful when it's just hot off the press, and in truth, it probably is at best in progress, but I'm excited about it. As you know, the painter Matisse had more than one rhythm, and I have been writing several poems about him for several years. I think particularly in this poem of his early rhythm, the fast one that delighted in piling up objects. The other one, you remember, was slower, as you would see in his dancers or in his later years cutouts. But this one is particularly about the faster one, this in which I get the sense of appetitiveness, of gathering. Matisse. From the beginning, there was clutter, meaning women, the cluttered bodies of women. Still life with objects on desk, still life with oranges, in a dining room, pears strewn on the cloth, decanters, bowls heaped with peaches, apples, a rounded servant behind the table bringing flowers. In a photograph, Madame Matisse is stern, buttoned in brown serge, standing apart in a studio crammed with canvases. Had she once undressed here? Did she recognize her body in the inexplicable discs, red, chartreuse, that floated sometimes opaque into his skies? Even the nudes those years were knees, elbows, stomachs jutting past the chairs they reclined on, fullness, a plenitude of objects, the baby's crib filling up. A man who couldn't let go of anything then, whose dreams gathered patterns, each shape in its color, finally released his wife by turning her into shadow, a silhouette at a balcony saying no, into geometry, 100 sittings that changed her face to a mask, an eyeless oval with the feathered hat he loved. See how the hands of his subjects disintegrate, while his gripped the studio table, saying, mine. Before I came to Agnes Scott, I had studied for some years with Eugenia Dozier. Ms. Dozier was a professor here who taught dance, and I enjoyed my study with her ballet and other kinds of dance she taught in the summers. Perhaps some of you remember at Jacob's Pillow with Ruth St. Dennis and Ted Shawn and that first blossoming of modern dance. Most of all, though, I enjoyed learning from her how to dance with castanets. I have changed her name in this poem to protect the innocent. Private lessons. Can you hear me? Miss Dalton told me once that her castanets were carved for her by Rita Hayworth's father. The left castanet's the man, the right's the woman, who speaks 4 times, 4 fingers rolled off the edge, before the man speaks once. Senor Cancino had taught her everything. She would always tuck the castanets in her bra to warm them, so that when she played, their voices would be deep. While some someone stuttered Albanian on a piano near the studio mirror, she passed on her art to me. The three-tack lightning of toe heel heel, the brush of castanets above the head, how to turn your chin as if to watch one clicking hand rise from the small of your back, arc upward and arc outward and up to meet the other, how to draw one wrist across the body as slowly as a torero's blade, holding every man's eyes. It was the throbbing body displayed and withheld. It was all curve and tautness and belief. The dance slept inside Miss Dalton was a secret. When it rose, her heavy spinster body began to arch as if Senor Cansino were watching. Her warm castanets fluttered, pulsed, like hands inside her hands. She was speaking, his deep voice again and again an answer. Now a simple domestic story. The gerbil. We had meant her to learn mazes, to choose her food according to some plan our sons would dream up in class. But the gerbil we found brought forth babies, small, pink, rubbery as the prizes in cereal. And that night, as we slept, she ate them. Next day, as I stirred oatmeal, she observed me with eyes almost closed, a tiny leg sticking out of a guiltless face. That, of course, was an archetypal story. Happens to be true, of course, but that's the beauty of archetypes sometimes. They have this great, deep, pre-conscious imagery. And of course, what that is about the mouth of death, about hell's mouth. And in fact, you may remember that medieval plays, which were presented on wagons and taken, as it were, to the audiences at different parts of the medieval town by the guildsmen who performed them, that medieval plays ended with, or almost ended with, hellmouth on one of the wagons, which was a large cave with shark's teeth that at the end the sinners were forced to enter. Hellmouth. Something about birth's journey made us fear return. Picture death as shark mouth, dragon throat. When a bright carnivorous flower opens its curving lips, we are transfixed. The image older than words. Even in a mystery play, see the sober guildsmen shiver in the sharp-toothed cave, though they know how this one ends. The parade back into the light. Hell harrowed, supper waiting at home. A few years ago, I saw a retrospective of some of Degas' paintings. Oddly, I seem to be drawn to write about painters I don't really like. I always thought Degas was just somebody who drew pretty ballerinas that were hung up on walls, with flowers on the wallpaper. And never really took him seriously. But as I started looking at this whole series of his life's work, as it were, I was a little shaken because it seemed to me that more and more the women in his paintings were suffering changes not of their own choosing. Sometimes it was as though he'd just taken a white brush and that was their face. These faces were looking more and more garish, more and more as though he really didn't like those ladies. Now, we don't know a lot about Degas, but I think I found out later it's not impossible. Maybe he didn't He loved to see women move, to remember them frozen in the stage lights. All those girls in tutus leaning forward, letting brightness brush their throats, foreheads. The cafe singer with her head thrown back, footlights blanching her chin, whitening her nostrils. He needed powdered faces that turned to chalk near gaslight. Needed women not touching his arm in some garden, but waiting on stage, available and distant as geishas. This poem is sort of in 3 parts, which does not mean it's a long poem. It goes sleep to death to sleep. And after I had almost finished this poem, I happened to be reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is, a tremendously exciting book. I was reading it partly because of Northrop Frye's interest in it. I don't know whether you're as interested as I am in his work, but I wrote also the first paper on his unknown early publications of fiction, short stories, which I guess one could classify as anatomies. Certainly they're satiric themselves. But every time I would talk to him in his office or in Toronto, I would see a journal on the desk or several journals on the bookshelves, and one did not ask to look at those journals, even really to touch them. I always wondered what was in there, what were in those notebooks where supposedly some of his earlier ideas were. And after his death now, they are locked up in the Pratt Library at Victoria University of the University of Toronto. And I'm one of the few people who's had the great privilege of getting to read some of them. And there in his journals, it says that he really did want to write more fiction. And there's a line that says he would like to write a Bardo novel. Quote, how the hell does one write a Bardo novel? Now, as you know, the states of Bardo in Tibetan Buddhism refer to the gaps, the spaces between states of being. And the Tibetan Book of the Dead itself is meant to be read, as you, I'm sure know, into the ear of the corpse. As he lies there, or she lies there, I suppose women are allowed to hear it. I don't know. Anyway, to guide them in the journey that they must make after death, in confronting demon after evil spirit, after terror, in hopes that they will not have to be reincarnated in ways they don't want to be reincarnated. So it dawned on me, to end this lengthy introduction, that this is what I was writing about, 2 Bardo states, in which you leave one kind of being and are, for a short time or a long time, in another. Sleep. Help me to cross the Bardo's dangerous pathway, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. At night, the fingers cradle themselves in each other, curl like petals, close as if for warmth. Though sometimes the edge of a little finger may sense the continent's end of the bed, each morning, look, they are crumpled, close together. This is the body that would protect us, if it could, when we go into nightmare, mazes, screams, caverns, burning rooms, whose hands clasp air, clasp each other as we fall, but cannot save us. This is the body we will finally leave, our spirits flying through the door of an open mouth, when the flesh we have loved or hated, washed and cared for, will be left to fade as we journey, already lonely for our own company, for the home that always lingered to take us back, that looked like us, the only shape others will see as we race past the lights and the roaring of 1,000 thunders and the lords of death, to wait for the black and white stones to be counted, the heart to be weighed against a feather. But now at night, abandoned in sleep, our outlines move by themselves. Blind hands crush flowers on the sheets, trace pillow stitching. Mornings when we return to our bodies, at first they are strangers, unrecognized gloves we slip on. When we wake a lover, a child, it is easy to forget the distances, the complications of return. Wake up, we say, shaking his shoulder, seeing his eyes still focused inward, watching the last dream recede. Wake up, we say, wanting him to hurry back to himself. Now I'll read some poems from Holding Patterns. The first about my father, who began practicing medicine in the Depression, and was an old-style doctor, and has been retired for some years now. Lab work. My father could do it himself. He didn't trust lab technicians who didn't know his patients, or the health department who cut the rate of disease by changing definitions. When there was danger, he'd run the tests himself, smearing blood, heating tubes of liquid over purple flame. Once, my mother told me, he x-rayed himself, positioned his ribs against the cold veneer of the new machine, asked her to push the button. He developed it himself. I imagine him there, in the room he painted black, one red light glowing, acrid fluid sloshing in enormous trays, watching as the negative slowly appears, white lines, a rib cage rising, himself coming up like a flutter, the heart, the bright, unbending spine. My name, Memye, M-E-M-Y-E, is a contraction of my real name, which is Mary Emmy, which was also the name of my mother and my grandmother and her mother. It was the name, that's what a given name is, I guess. It was given to the women because they couldn't give the surname. Father could give. I'm the only Mary Emmy still living. And therefore, it's up to me to keep going and keep reliving and keep making some meaning of this life that we all share. And since these women, the ones I knew and the ones I heard about, were legendarily compassionate, courageous, self-sacrificing, it's impossible for me to live up to ghosts. The ghosts of my grandmothers will not be trifled with or teased into speech. They have already spoken. Now they watch. Wax in the proper places, smiles, sacrifice, no salt on silver, children warned of the undertow, a glass of milk for the stranger at the door, as little lying as possible, as little truth. They want such things remembered, and no jot or tittle more. No sniveling early to bed, waste not. They are awake all night. They wasted nothing and still want everything. I try to satisfy them, but I spill the milk, grow tired, slip into their shadow, tell strangers what I suspect the truth. Yet I speak with their voices, lie under their quilts, bear their hand-me-down names. Whatever meaning I have is theirs. No man owns us, but we own each other. Our lives are one long life, milk, child, myth. On good days, bequeathed like family silver. Those nights, I polish the spoons, holding them up to the dark. does not come and pick up our trash. Various disposal companies vie for this privilege, and we pay them. At one point, inexplicably, several companies all decided we had paid them, and they will come in for trash, not just Tuesdays and Fridays, but Mondays and Thursdays. And they would come, and didn't know who to call. They didn't have signs on the sides of their trucks. I would hide behind the refrigerator. You do all you can to put out trash so that they won't find it empty. But finally, there's really nothing left. Last things. A mistake somewhere. 3 companies coming for trash. It drives the dog crazy. It's all we can do to keep the cans half full for unmarked trucks, silhouettes of men whose heads are tubs. We make up scraps the best we can. When we run out of boxes, they'll come inside for blankets. The blue and white plate we won at the fair, they'll come for us. Their hands are strong. Everything they touch is trash. My family lived for several generations, well, really since its founding, I guess, in College Park, Georgia, which began about 2 years ago. It was meant to be a nice, pleasant residential area, a planned city, as it were, with 2 colleges and a park. And it was a lovely place to grow up. And then the Atlanta airport came and decided it needed more and more and more room. Now, College Park has annexed some land in other areas, but to me, that's not College Park, because that was not the beginning. That was not the essential planned city. And when the airport came in, I don't know whether you know, but they tore down house after house, street after street of houses, and they put asphalt over them for runways and concrete. They would make highways and runways out of them. I met someone when I was reading a while back who told me that his mother had died of sorrow from having to leave her house and having it disappear. Holding patterns. Staring at concrete, you can only imagine the streets that disappeared under the runways of Hartsfield Airport. East Oxford, Yale, the piano teacher's house where porcelain ladies swirled on mahogany tables and hyacinths bloomed in china bowls in early spring, where after recitals there were cherries and whipped cream. At the high school reunion, no one returned who had lived in the part of town airplanes have made desert. This is not Brigadoon. There will always be nowhere to come back to. From where houses stood, planes take off 1 a minute, dropping exhaust as they rise over Camp Creek. Sometimes returning, they wait in holding patterns, flying along imagined avenues in the air. Then if someone looks down, he may see where a road pulls out from the edge of the runway, begins again. May see the cemetery we thought would wait for us, our family's names in marble crumbling under the fumes. Yes, there are TVA lakes with whole towns under them, a road going down, coming out, where a swimmer, when the light is right, could see it all. But there are other burials. Will you come in? It is a joy to see your faces, and this I consider my political poem. I've written other political poems, but I guess really to be a good political poem, you have to really know deeply what you're writing about. And I see someone from my workshop at Calhoun who's been writing political poems, and it's nice to see some of the folks, you all know each other and students don't know you, who have done such marvelous writing in those workshops. And it is also nice to see Lowry Frazier, who is the incoming president of the Alumni Association. She told me the other day, who would have thought that two people who began in Mary's Sweet Cottage, we didn't even rate the dormitory, would become president of the Alumni Association. Do you ever travel through various cities, now that we're traveling more and more, and you get to a town or a city and you think, I know someone here, and I could just call them up and say, hello, and you don't do it. Airport phone booth. All those men who couldn't live without me did. I see their faces as I travel through their cities. If I telephone, intelligent children would answer. Cool wives would wait at perfect dining tables, and deep, polite voices would be fine. How am I? At the Handmade Center this summer, and it's the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, where I'm going in a couple of weeks, up in the mountains of Virginia. But at the Handmade Center, which is also in the mountains, in North Georgia, they say it's the second wettest area in the whole country. I thought it was really wonderful. It was fascinating too. You'd leave paper out on a table and touch it, and it was dimpled permanently. You couldn't leave your books out. You needed to keep them. I'm sure that there are many of you folks who are from that area and know how to deal with it. But those of us who came from the desert of Atlanta or Philadelphia or such other places were a little surprised. You had to leave your computer on all the time because you might not get it back on again. But it was wonderful to be there. It's beautiful, the way the constant change in the landscape is created by water. Raven Gap. Fog gathers around the mountain, opens, glides away, still holding rain. Now it's everywhere, moisture in every atom of the wind. Mist clings to our hands, softly brushes our bodies in the places air had touched without our notice. It is clearer now that what we thought was space between us is the earth's invisible breath. At Handmade, there was a woman from abroad who said she was a sensitive. I'd never met a sensitive before. And she said that among other things, she could read or see or whatever people do to auras. I did not ask her to tell me about my aura because I didn't want her paying attention to it if I had one, because it might, as curious as you'd like to know about it, but I realized if she really looked at my aura, she would see that I didn't really believe her entirely, and then maybe we wouldn't be friends. Of course, I've always wondered, since then, if I should have, but do you think people can read minds? One is tempted, isn't one, to believe sometimes. The mind reader. Cards are chosen. He reads through the pockets where they're hidden. Jack of hearts, 9 of clubs. His brown eyes glisten in the spotlight. He's guessing the numbers in the MC's mind. Does he know how it happens? Could he be what he seems? In the huge applause, he starts to leave, smiling, but frowning a little too. Now shaking his head as though something's wrong, as if suddenly the trick's up. And he sees the inspection number inside the pocket of the ugliest man in the audience. The cameraman's final notice, the years left in the stage manager's lungs, sees where next year's mugger will hide his wallet, how many children he'll have, and their secrets. Sees his wife reach in her purse, dial a number that changes everything. Sees the cards already cut and nothing left. He's looking around as if to be rid of his gift, to wish it on anyone. The accountant alone in the back row maybe, a script girl, the page taking his arm. But he's old news. They're watching the next performer, and a taxi's waiting. he sees its sprung seat, the battery running low. Interesting what we remember. Not always all the good things, not the things our parents would like us to remember. I was the only child in my family for 10 years, and thus was the only boy in the family, and thus was the fishing companion of my father. And I learned to love to fish. But one night, he announced he thought it would be a good idea to go fishing for gar. Do you know what gar are? Long prehistoric fish, yes, with long mouths and razor-sharp teeth. There are some little gars in the aquarium in Chattanooga, and a sign up there says something like the largest gar ever weighed something like 276 pounds. The ones they have are not that big, but the ones we were going fishing for were. Why would one do this? I didn't know. Garfish. No rail to hold to at the end of the endless Panama City Pier. The one tall light hitting splintered boards, only topping the black water our legs swung out over. That cold night he took me fishing for gar. I don't know why we went. The strangers leaving had crab nets, cut stingrays for bait. They caught food, not the sight of a long-mouthed monster shaking up from the waves. How old was I then? You let me wear your leather cap. I was your only daughter, only son. What I remember is the obsidian water, deeper than I could imagine. My fist tight on the drop line, waiting for the jerk of whatever came up from the dark for me. If a gar had come that night, maybe I'd remember something else. Some victory of hand and lure over danger, or the steel wire bitten off, hooks and weights lost, or even water rushing over my head as the line pulled me down into the cold black. Instead, it is only fear that I remember, sitting on that edge, for once not tempted to jump to end the tension, held back by what I felt swimming beneath us, its teeth sharp, its black eyes looking up toward our light. A brief history. In that dark water, our ancestors finned, dreaming us, till something like a voice called in the tide, and the glassy beach received them, gasping, shining. Then Adam, at great peril to himself, gave us sin, that simple explanation. Asked Jacob, it is not seed that shapes, but struggle, hip to hip, bone to bone. Choose your adversary carefully. His face will form the dark side of your own. I like rocks. I'm not a nature poet, but I really like rocks. You can take as many as you want. I sometimes feel, though, I take so much, I'm sort of overloading this part of the world, wherever I am. But nobody's noticed this scientifically, so it may not be true. You don't have to feed rocks, you don't have to water rocks, you don't have to watch them grow. They just sit there and they're beautiful. Maybe they don't love you, but I love them. This is one of my poems about rocks. Trilobite stone. Excuse me, it's about fossils, obviously. Before they looked at death, 400 million years ago, these bodies opened and closed, little worlds of desire, drank dark waters, their life a transcendence. When they lay down, bumping against each other, pressing into mud, circle upon circle, The earth washed over them, weighed down, exchanged soft cells for calcite, now only form called beauty. They last as a moment lives beyond itself, when each crevice is replaced by something other, quartz vein, ice, agate like tumbled forests. I rub the stone shiny surface. Under my thumb, rounded shapes resist, full of themselves. Perhaps you know that there have been composers who were deaf, as there have been artists who were losing their eyesight. What would it be like to be an artist? This is your whole life, your whole being, and to lose the very thing that enables you to be an artist. Smetana was one of these composers, but instead of having silence in his mind, which is what I would think deafness would be, he had an E, a high E, squealing at him all the time, filling up what would be his workspace, it seems to me. Now Schumann, we're told, had an A, but Smetana's was an E, and yet he kept composing, and in fact, he composed a piece called in German, Aus meinem Leben, from my life, which was an autobiographical composition, which made me wonder about the whole question of loss to an artist. One would love to think that troubles make art better. Is this necessarily true? Aus meinem Leben. Deafness is not silence. The high E piercing the close of Smetana's E minor string quartet was the note that rang in his head every moment of his last years. No space in the composer's mind, not already jammed with sound. Think of Monet straining against his own fingers while the traitorous flowers blurred. Think of dazed, soaring Nijinsky, for whom pain's knife was as daily as bread. What the body takes is given back in vision. We want to believe. Desire, old as our first knowledge of pain, longs to hear the enemy's voice subdued, beaten into something of use, a fugue, a twisting leap, pigment the color of flame. I was emptying my family home a few years ago after my mother's death, and it was to be sold, and it was so full of so many wonders that I had either never seen before or always cherished. A pomegranate, the title of this is Pomegranate. A pomegranate was so rare in our house. Did she think it selfish to be happy alone? That it was a surprise after my mother's funeral to find one in the kitchen window, ripening in the pale December sun. I remembered one there only once before, when I was a child. She smiled as she cut the fruit, held out the first red seeds to me, which broke in my mouth like fire. They seemed at that moment to delight her as much as showering stars, as her bright key to the city of New Orleans, as compliments on her hazel eyes. I left the fruit in the window as I packed dance cards, speeches, snapshots, infant curls. I brought it all home, where the pomegranate darkened to a geode on my windowsill, nothing redeemed. Had I split open that inheritance, let ripe bursts sting my tongue. What might I think of now that spring returns, slanting remembered light into my kitchen? What longing have I escaped? We are reaching the end of the millennium. The end of the century is always a time when people sort of go crazy, or at least see more or different things, it would seem, from the things that they see at other times. We remember in particular the end of the 19th century. But this is important, the millennium. It's full of signs and portents. We can see that on television, read it in the paper. In the 17th century, you may remember Sir Thomas Browne thought that at the end of this millennium would be the end of the world. And he was not the only one. In fact, it was really a general belief among many people. We whose generations are ordained to live in the setting part of time, he said. And it is too late to be ambitious. Give it up. The world's almost over. Now we hear David Koresh. Now we hear prediction after prediction that the rapture is coming. Rapture, I don't need to tell you, is the term for the taking up of the saved into heaven before the end of the world. Rapture. This is the day the world didn't end. For the faithful, so expectant on last night's news, the rapture, if it came somewhere else. No upgus reported here, no abandoned cars. Then, what of the TV repair shop in North Carolina that rushed to finish its orders in time? What of all the girls who, just in case, repented, promised never again? Were they taken into the air this morning without a cry? They say that 100 years ago, believers from a Patchogue congregation gave away their possessions, put on choir robes, climbed in the dark the gentle slope of Ascension Hill, stood waiting to be lifted into the sunrise. Think of them at nightfall, as one by one they turned from the sky, walked slowly down the path to their neighbor's eyes, to empty, echoing houses. And one last point. When I taught poetry writing, I had a wonderful student who was Chinese. She was Professor Ball's student as well. And she was a remarkable young woman who wrote a poem one time about the goddess of mercy, the Chinese goddess of mercy, even though she was Taoist. I longed to have some sense of what it would be to have some sort of female deity one might pray to. Being a Southern Baptist, I had not experienced that until I was driving home one rainy afternoon from the place where a lady fixes my clothes. Seamstress. Margaret, Lady of Alterations, have mercy on me. On the arm that cannot reach as far as its sister, on the shoulder that rises each morning in excitement. Margaret, Margaret, make me perfect. Take my collars flapping, the buttonholes already raveling when I bring them home, the plackets made by the blind, the broken stitches, all these injured ones, take them, Margaret, heal them. I will return on Thursday, though it rain, though ice freeze in your doorway. I will pour out my purse and stand before your three-way mirror. I will take home all that you have mended.
Wasn't that wonderful? Thank you everyone for being here. And thank you especially to the wonderful Mimi. We are so grateful for your wise words and your beautiful poetry and for the opportunity to share your work this year at this festival. We'll see you all back in a couple of hours for Jacqueline Goldfinger's reading.